She was talking primarily about the mammals. And what I'm going to be talking about today, to a very significant extent, also applies to the human organism. There are, of course, certain differences, because if those differences didn't exist, we wouldn't need a special lecture specifically dedicated to the influence of aromatic substances on animals. But please remember, we are mammals too. That which we know from for many decades regarding the action of odorous substances. This is the message that reaches you through many channels, namely the activation of signals in the olfactory bulb, chemoreceptors detecting molecules of odorous compounds. Chemoreceptors are located in our area, in the head area generally speaking, and through the nose inhaled air travels to the chemoreceptors. Compounds also reach the chemoreceptors, and then the appropriate signal is sent. What is important is that this signal path is short. Between a stimulus and a reaction, there's a very short time, partly due to the short signal path in the nervous system, and the path. This signal leads directly to the limbic system of the brain, which is that area of the brain that is responsible for emotions, but also for cognitive functions. So it's not just a question of us liking some smells and disliking others, but aromatic substances. The sapin, and this is the principle on which aromatherapy operates, can also influence whether we learn more easily or we learn with greater difficulty. Of course, depending on whether this exposure occurs at the start of life, during, or at its end, we also deal with different situations, but generally speaking, the influence of aromatic substances on our bodies and on animal organisms is not just an impact on emotions, but this impact on emotions is, of course, also very important. Fragrant substances affect the release of various neurotransmitters. I'll show them to you in a moment. So the previously mentioned serotonin on the slide isn't the only player in this whole story. And also the fact that we have a relatively short distance to cover. The signal travels very quickly, and there is no processing of this specific signal within the thalamus, which is a distinct region of the brain. This unique pathway allows olfactory stimuli to reach our brain indirectly, of course, by way of the nasal cavity. Though function more rapidly than analogous sensory impulses delivered, for example, by means of the sense of vision or the sense of touch.
It's also true for animals.
It's working. I'm going to skip over some of the specific details at this particular moment. The primary neurotransmitters that are actively involved here include serotonin, which directly influences our emotions, our mood, and our sleep patterns. And then there's GABA, our main inhibitory brake, which has a very significant calming effect. Extremely important for people with ADHD like myself, for example, but also when working with animals, for animal behaviorists. The fact that we can translate aromatic compounds into GABA is incredibly significant in practice and in the resulting effects. Dopamine. Those of us with ADHD, we know exactly what this means. Without dopamine, we simply cannot function. Norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and glutamate. So it's not just serotonin and it's not just GABA. Aromatic substances have the ability to trigger a wide variety of pathways. And we've actually known this for several decades now. This is not a new development. So what exactly is news? It's that we now have additional different avenues for action. Aromatic compounds, as you know, must be volatile. Because of this, they are typically relatively small organic molecules which are lipophilic to varying degrees, but generally more so than not. Consequently, they are able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier with great ease and can then directly influence the specific receptors for neurotransmitters within the central nervous system. So it's not just the pathway through the chemoreceptors within our olfactory organ that triggers the ultimate effect, but we also have a direct route of influence on the nervous system itself. This could be quite interesting, or it could turn out to be not so pleasant. From a toxicological perspective, I really wouldn't be so quick or casual about just freely digging around in that particular area. And furthermore, in cases of animal organisms, for example, regarding their detailed metabolism and the specific toxicology of aromatic compounds, sometimes specialists have, so to speak, a very limited understanding because it might concern, for instance, a specially bred ornamental parrot species. For that very reason, I would not experiment on my own. Moving on, some ingredients in fragrance oils also affect, for example, gene expression associated with the stress response. So we move from chemoreceptors and so on and so on. Pause. Then we transition to epigenetics. Pause. And that's a whole new chapter beginning here. To include. Well, you are also aware, of course, of the bactericidal bacteriostatic action depending on the concentration and on what compound or mixture we are talking about. Anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective actions depending on what we are discussing, and the influence on the microbiota is also of paramount importance throughout this entire narrative. However, we possess other types of receptors, not merely those receptors designed for neurotransmitters within the olfactory system, but throughout the organisms of mammals and birds, there exists a vast array of other chemoreceptors, to which odorant substances can indeed have and do possess a strong affinity. Of course, my beloved TRP, TRPV, if you listen to me from time to time, you know that I know a lot about TRPV because they are fascinating and I'm constantly learning. To quote someone, I won't say who. And many more aromatic compounds are primarily responsible for activating these TRP receptors, or it blocks these TRPV receptors, which are specifically located in our skin and also in the skin of various animals, as well as in the oral cavity of our own mouths and those of our beloved animal friends. Why are TRPs important? TRPs are incredibly important because they play a role in the initiation of itching. For example, well, we know that if something itches us, we instinctively scratch it. This is, by the way, a kind of masking reaction. A signal originating from TRP. There, cannabinoid receptors come into play, and these provide a much stronger stimulus. So when we scratch ourselves, this particular stimulus effectively masks the sensation that's associated with the induction of itching. That's why we scratch when something itches, and animals scratch for the same reason. But an animal can't tell us why it's scratching. Is it just an itch, or is it an itch from an infestation, like simply put, a flea outbreak?
Are there any further reasons?
However, the crucial understanding that we possess that by employing TRP channels and their interaction with TRP receptors, we are able to make an attempt to alleviate itching is a novelty for us and is very important information, for example, when formulating and compounding products for animals and veterinary products and typical grooming products. in cosmetics. Remember this. And since we are already discussing TRP, it's crucial to understand that TRPV receptors found both in animals and in humans can actually be distributed with varying densities and in quite different regions of the body. For example, we possess a great number of TRPV1 receptors within our oral cavity. These are precisely the ones that are activated by capsaicin, and that's why after consuming spicy peppers, we perceive a distinct hot sensation. Menthol, however, effectively blocks these receptors, thereby alleviating the sensations, yet we still experience warmth as they are simultaneously a group of thermoreceptors.
We experience pain, and it is truly unpleasant for us.
However, dogs actually don't have TRPV1 receptors in their oral cavity, which is why they are extremely sensitive to heat. They only move away from a heat source when they already feel the pain associated with the burn. They don't possess the same reflex as we do, where we instinctively pull back if or spit out tea that's excessively hot. And incidentally, a dog can quite literally chew on a hot chili pepper with complete impunity, and you won't observe any symptoms from them, such as excessive drooling and so forth and so forth. This serves as an illustrative example for you to easily remember this point. The same group of receptors in different organisms can function quite differently distributed. We currently possess extensive knowledge regarding how to influence human mood through the use of aromatic substances. But can we also attempt to apply a similar approach in the context of animals? That's what I was talking about. Our human sense of smell and our brain. But with animals, for example, a dog, we have a completely different story, a totally different structure. In animals, there is also what is known as the vomeronasal organ. This is the organ that is marked in yellow on the diagram, and there is also an additional part shown in blue. In humans, this particular organ is vestigial. It is present in infants and very quickly regresses during the course of development. What purpose does it serve for animals? Well, it is specifically designed to detect pheromones. And that is precisely why the question of whether a human pheromone truly exists and how one might go about creating it has been, as you are well aware, a highly contentious issue for a great many years. Because in some of us, in certain individuals, this vomeronasal organ has either atrophied more completely or perhaps a little less so. Consequently, the reaction to potential human pheromones is very diverse within the population. In animals, that's usually not the case. It's rather simple, and pheromones have a significantly greater influence on an animal's organism than those aromatic substances which, as described earlier, travel with generated stimuli to the brain. What's truly fascinating, by the way, is the construction, a purely mechanical one, from the perspective of a chemical engineer of this particular vomeronasal organ, because within it you'll find what's known as the ethmoid bone. Inside this bone, a turbulent movement of air occurs, leading to the sorption of odor molecules, which means we achieve a concentration effect. And do you remember Hannibal Lecter? Well, this is what's known as the Flehmen response, a fascinating behavior that we observe in many animals. They draw in air in a very specific and unique way, precisely so that it can pass through a specialized sensory organ. Through this process of concentrating these tiny scent particles, and because of this remarkable ability, animals are able to perceive even the very weakest of olfactory stimuli. Every single person who owns a cat has undoubtedly seen how this particular thing operates. The cat then forms a very distinct facial expression with its upper lip slightly raised, and it proceeds to draw in air. All right, I've definitely rambled on for too long. So now let's quickly get to the specifics. Listen, these pheromonal scent substances are incredibly important in the way animals communicate. Various types of research and studies have been conducted on this topic. So what's the main takeaway from all of this? Don't overdo it when washing your pet's bedding or thoroughly cleaning their cages. It absolutely needs to be hygienic. It must be clean. But if the conditions become completely sterile, and I mean sterile in quotation marks, because we're not talking about microorganisms here, if these are conditions where absolutely no scent particles are left behind. I'm not talking about urine or feces, but about animal pheromones secreted primarily by sebaceous glands. This adversely affects the animal's well-being and welfare. What compounds have the characteristics of animal pheromones? Well, science has been debating this for many, many years. What caused my jaw to drop slightly was this methyl 4-hydroxybenzoate, a paraben mentioned in several publications as a dog pheromone. I was so surprised because then essentially everything we do, given that parabens are found everywhere, would have a pheromonal impact on our animals, but that's not the case. So I dug deeper. Later, it was investigated more thoroughly, and it was disproven that parabens are dog pheromones. But pay attention to this. Review literature is sometimes of poor quality, and sometimes these parabens still appear. They are not actually dog pheromones, and I'm also showing you some relevant publications as examples. Well, pheromones, much like other aromatic compounds, are typically quite small in size and generally lipophilic. At this moment, in practical applications, when we're formulating various products for animals, we primarily utilize what is commonly referred to as DAP. This particular substance is a specific type of canine pheromone, which is naturally produced by the mother's sebaceous glands, specifically designed to help calm and soothe her young puppies. And it is frequently employed in various preparations designed to soothe and calm animals. For cats specifically, it is again, a bit differently, a different group of compounds. You can read about it later in the presentation. In any case, this felinine wasn't such an obvious truth that it's responsible for both pheromonal action and the scent. Thanks to the fact that we currently know what this structure is, we can try to neutralize it. An amino acid containing sulfur can be bound, I don't know, with zinc salts, for example, right? Zinc ricinoleate can, the simplest one, can give us really good effects here. All right. Everyone knows what cats do with their pheromones. I've already spoken about TRPV, how odorous substances influence behavior. They can have anxiolytic effects, they can have calming effects, but they can also produce the opposite result. They can have stimulating effects. As for their applications, if we are talking about dogs, it is certainly possible. We can do it. We can try. However, when it comes to cats, be careful. Cat toxicology is so different from that of dogs and humans that you truly need to be very, very careful. Cats are unable to metabolize simple aromatic compounds, meaning the benzene ring is not hydrophilized during their metabolism. And these compounds, yes, precisely, this simple aromatic structure accumulates in a cat's body and will simply be deadly for them.
Well, the most dreadful owner-related situation I've ever had to deal with, I believe, was a cat that had completely rolled itself in railway sleeper preservative. And the owner asks me, Kashka, how do I wash this off? What can I do? How can I save this cat? Because that was an era when vets had absolutely no idea about this. So I simply told them to immediately shave the cat and wash the rest of the cat's surface with the first available fat the owner could find. Any butter, oil, or olive oil will do. Just act quickly, because the penetrability of lipophilic xenobiotic substances, both through the skin of dogs and through the skin of cats, is significantly higher than it is in the case of human skin. Lavender and chamomile classic for calming. However, when it comes to stimulating effects for dogs, we have rosemary and surprisingly mint. So if you're looking for a calming, soothing effect, then you should stay far, far away from mint and rosemary. But remember that a lot of research. These are studies that were conducted in conditions quite different from typical home environments. These investigations were primarily carried out in animal shelters and various other unnatural situations. So we cannot simply apply these findings directly or translate them on a one-to-one basis. We're discussing the direction of things, aren't we? Lavender and chamomile are calming, while rosemary is stimulating. I was explaining the unique differences in cat metabolism. So what exactly is it that calms cats down? Catnip, of course, but also the distinct sense of their prey. What is the real point of all this? The idea is a cat that's aware there's food just around the corner or right by its sleeping spot won't simply sleep because it has that food guaranteed. However, if there's no such scent, then it sets out on a hunt. These findings are mainly various aromatic substances produced by rodents' sebaceous glands. As you can probably guess, they are also present in substances excreted by rodents. You'll find even more details about this in the presentation. How various essential oils affect animals, specifically their behavior, according to the available scientific research. Nadostekis is proving to be particularly interesting when it comes to horses. The thing is, it's not known here whether this is an aromatherapeutic type of action or if it's an indirect action, which we owe to the fact that Nardostakis repels biting insects and simply the stimuli, the irritating stimuli for our horse are reduced. One final point to make, birds, because of their... We consider this to be another characteristic of exposure to toxins through inhalation. I invite you to familiarize yourselves with an article by Dr. Kokoczynska, which discusses the olfactory preferences of dogs. Lavender usually comes out on top because it simply has a calming effect, effectively reducing stress, and that's something we all appreciate and enjoy. Our animals as well. I want to thank you all very much. For any discussion or questions, I invite you to our booth, number 451. I am at your disposal. Thank you very much.